through the 1700s, that was pretty much our beer culture. Um, English ales and little pubs. And then finally, in the early to mid 1800s is when we saw these big changes, just as the rest of the world was seeing them. They were definitely happening here in the U.S. And that's when we had the big industrialization of beer production. We had lager brewing sweeping the world in the starting in the mid 1800s. We got conflicts going on in Germany. Indiana was the 19th state in the country. And at that time, we're looking to grow the country, as was all of the Midwest. So we were literally sending flyers to places like Germany, all around Germany, and saying, come to Indiana and we'll give you land.
Joe Werner is case in point.
Oh, really? One of those?
Absolutely, Oldensburg.
So we had, I mean, they were given these flyers. It was like, find a way, get on a boat, get to a port in America, make your way to Indiana, find a courthouse, read this. And it was like kind of written out phonetically to where you would, you didn't know the language, but if you read the way that it said, it was saying, I'm from Germany, I want land, and I want to be a farmer. And you'd get land. And this is how this country was, or the whole Midwest. Indiana was about 90% founded by Germans. And it was during this period right here. So now, starting the mid 1800s and even further back, as we're going to talk about here, Germany had a huge beer market. We had the industrialization and pale lagers going big time by, the 1940s or 1840s and 50s, but there was still beer culture, big beer culture going before that. So these Germans come over here with a beer culture mindset and realize this country was fertile for breweries and to establish a beer culture because we didn't really have one. And so finally, by the mid to late 1800s, which is only 170 years ago, we finally got a beer culture. So compared to the rest of the world, who's had a beer culture for 1,000-ish plus years, we didn't have much. And we didn't really know what this beer was supposed to taste like. And they come over here. And again, we didn't have a lot of barley. We started developing a barley and hops agriculture, but we didn't have much initially. So corn was a pretty natural thing to use, and a little bit of it's okay. You can still make a great beer with a little bit of corn. And that certainly cuts down your expenses of importing that stuff in some of the earlier days. But we had other big problems. We got these tied houses. I could talk about this forever, but in Germany, you go to a place that says Paulaner on the window, and they only serve Paulaner beer. And that was a system that grew up there over hundreds of years, so it works just fine, and it's still intact today. But here, you had all these Germans coming over. They're making these big breweries, and everybody's trying to just gobble up market share. So you'd end up with a little town like Brownsburg or something, and you got 70 bars in it because each one was representing a different brewery. So these places turned to gambling and prostitution and drugs. We were drinking a shit ton of beer. It took until 40 years after Prohibition to get back to the same level of beer consumption we had before Prohibition. And that's with only one segment of the population drinking and a much smaller country. So from 1933 until 1974 is when we got back to the same level of beer consumption that we had in 1920. I mean, you think about that, it's like, my God, we were drunk. So we needed an intervention. There was a lot of truly bad stuff going on. I'm not saying Prohibition was the answer, but we were kind of messed up. We messed ourselves up with this freedom and this newfound beer culture and whiskey, and there was a lot going on. And then the thing that the final straw was World War I, and we're fighting against Germany, and all the names on the German breweries were German. So this became an ugly period in our history. Right here in Indianapolis, we had newspapers in German. And during this time, when World War I, that was when these places went out of business. They changed their name. People stopped speaking German. Germans were spit on the sidewalk. And so you started hiding the fact that you were German. And, you changed your name, things like that. So a lot happened, and then ultimately, and then this is a whole session we could do, but ultimately about 50 years into our beer culture, we're already thinking about prohibition. So we didn't have much of a beer culture. It was very short-lived, and then people started going dry, and then by 1920 we're dry nationwide. Indiana actually went dry a year or two before we went dry federally. So it was up to locales, states, cities, counties could go dry before. They didn't have to wait for the federal, and Indiana was one of them that didn't. So anyway, 50 years into our beer culture, and too much of a good thing, away it went. So we got this short beer history on a very steep slope downhill. Again, we started with the native corn, so things got a little lighter right off the bat compared to what the folks were drinking in Germany and the Czech Republic. As we start getting close to prohibition, everybody gets nervous, and it's like, okay, let's call it a healthy beverage. And they truly did this. They had advertisements and stuff. They reduced the ABV. They added more corn. The beer got lighter. They tried to say, well, it's healthy. It's much better than whiskey. And anyway, prohibition comes along. After prohibition, again, more corn. Percentage of corn went higher as we tried to make this an even lighter beverage. Again, cut some money out of it. People didn't know what they were tasting anyway. They had nothing to compare it to. They didn't even have, not only did they weren't comparing it to what they were drinking in Europe, but at this point after prohibition, it had been 13 or 14 years since they'd even had that version. So by after prohibition, the corn gets cranked up, the beers changed dramatically. And then the final straw was in the 1970s when we went into the health craze of the 1970s. Some of you are old enough to remember this. Some of you are not. But basically, people didn't exercise until like the 1970s. Very few people actually exercised for fun and ate healthy. You had enough activity just working and doing life that most people got some natural exercise, and we just didn't know enough about nutrition and heart disease and things like that. So literally this was before the 1970s, that was when baseball stars looked, they were big, round, people like Babe Ruth and stuff like that. So finally, health craze comes. Everybody starts running and learning that they need to take care of their bodies in the 1970s. And Miller Lite was one of the first ones that responded to that, or Miller responded to that with light beer in 1974. And of course, this was the final straw in the maximum amount of adjunct sugar and the ultimate in blandness. And this alcohol water with no beer history and nothing to fall back on, not knowing any better, this is where we arrived by the mid 70s. And that's pretty much where we've been ever since. This also happened with the breweries. We had 4,000 breweries in 1875. 100 years later, we didn't even have 100. Right? So so not only, back here in the 1875, we got a lot of people making German and Czech style lagers. They're drinking, pale beers. And even though it was different than what they were drinking in Europe, it was still probably a decent beer. But as we got closer to Prohibition, it got lighter and lighter. Then it got wiped out. Then it came back. And after Prohibition, it was just a completely different environment. There was kind of, it was the distributorships because of the 3-tier system that got invoked. It kind of pushed little breweries out of the market. Plus you had this whole sort of probationary period that people thought we were in, that if it didn't go well this time, then it's going to get outlawed again for good. So people didn't jump back into it. So literally, you see a few people that tried to get into it here, but by 1975, it had just dwindled. We had less than 100 breweries. 89 breweries was our low point in 1978. So if you only have 89 breweries in a country our size in the 1970s, there's not a lot of competition. And basically everybody's making the same swill. And it had just become accepted that this is what American beer was. So real lagers, they never stood a chance. 50 years in the U.S., then comes Prohibition. Adjuncts from the start. Breweries were on the defensive very early on and just tried to stay alive. Prohibition comes along and changes everything. Only the large breweries survive after that, the health craze of the 70s, and flavor was never really important to begin with because we didn't have anything to compare it to. So in the end, good beer, real lagers, they just never truly had a chance. And I do want to point out something, though. In this old ad for Budweiser, by God, at least we had glassware. In all of these old ads, you see pretty nice glassware. They treated beer with some respect. And, how we went from that time and decent, cool glassware to, the horrible shaker glass of today. That's just a whole other topic for discussion. But anyway, so what are these American lagers? I'll let Martin tell you the details, but they're pretty much, flavorless, fairly bland, but technically very hard to make. Beers, technically hard to make because any little flaw is going to show. They're made with high percentages of simple sugars. Simple sugars basically ferment out very cleanly, create some alcohol water, but don't add much flavor. Barley-based sugars, of course, contain more unfermentable sugars, which stick around. We call that flavor. These adjunct simple sugars typically come from rice and corn. There was the big fiasco where Bud Light said, Miller uses corn syrup. And it was very deceptive because they use rice syrup. And that's all bullshit. Of course, they lost this big lawsuit that Miller threw at them. And it was a big deal in the industry. Bottom line is this was very deceptive because simple sugars are simple sugars. It doesn't matter whether they come from rice or corn or syrups or extracts. You're just mincing words. And, you're making pretty much the same beer. Maybe some slight differences chemically, of course, but by and large, pretty same stuff. So, as I said earlier, they're designed to be drank cold. They're meant to be light, refreshing, dry, thirst-quenching beers. When ice cold, they actually do that. When they're not ice cold, you don't want to drink them. But ice cold, they serve their purpose. Slightly sweet, grainy, corn-like flavor, sometimes a little green apple, a little acetaldehyde type note, but a little yeast-derived fruitiness, pear, green apple type thing. Not much hop character to speak of. Lots of adjuncts in the lights, maybe 35 to 45% simple sugars, and that's in a 4% beer. So man, use 45% sugar in a 4% beer. You're just not going to have much. You're going to have some alcohol, water, and a little bit of flavor. And that's what the folks who drink these beers want. The percentage of the adjuncts go down as they get into the higher brands, but it's really those adjunct simple sugars that create these adjunct lagers. The international lagers are similar, but a little less sugar, a little more malt character. And typically I would go through how to drink beer. The one thing I will say, or how to evaluate beer, the one thing I'll say is make sure you give it a good sniff. These little, type things don't really get the job done. Your olfactory bulb is way up here in your head, way up here in your head. It's not in your nostrils, right? So if you just kind of go sniff, sniff, sniff like this, it's not getting up into that olfactory bulb. That olfactory bulb's like up here by my eyeballs, right? Deep inside my head. So if you're not getting that aroma really up in there at a good quantity to hit that olfactory bulb and let it linger there, you're not really smelling much. So make some noise. Get it up in there, right? It's going to make a huge difference to how you smell what's in a beer. When you take a sip, gentle swirl all around the palate, let it warm up a little bit. Let it hit taste buds and receptors that are all over our palate, cheeks, roof of our mouth, everywhere. Do a swirl for about 7 seconds, let it warm up, and then here's the tricky part. Keep your mouth closed after you swallow. We always exhale after we swallow. Keep your mouth closed after that swallow and do a slow retronasal exhale through your nose. You will taste that beer 10 times more on that exhale through your nose than when it was in your mouth. Okay. So not something I should have to tell most of you guys, but it's always a good little reminder. All right. So Miller Lite, I'll take us off share here. I will start pouring mine. And Martin, if you want, you can take over and start giving us the specs on this beer.
Thank you, sir. That was an excellent preview. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a comparison of these particular Pilsner styles. Ron took you through a great deal of the American history and the American beers that we're also looking at here.
Look at how beautiful that is, Martin. It can still pour a beautiful looking beer. There we go.
Look at my nice, and
yeah, look at that.
This is Miller Genuine Draft.
Yeah, and so hey, when I haven't, that was a big chunk of my presentation, but I've got a whole bunch of pictures and things to talk about for Pilsner Urquell. A little bit of a lead in and lots of pictures and just kind of talking about the beer and how it's poured and stuff like that. So take it away, sir.
Okay, so let's look at the comparison of these particular top styles, the American styles and the original, the what they call now the Czechoslovakian premium pale lager. So anyhow, with that, let me get this out of, oops, I'm sorry.
I'm recording this, by the way.
I do not know. Okay, let's look at the vital statistics for these guys. And of course, this is directly from BJCP. One of the primary things I'm trying to illustrate here is differences. So let's look at Czech Premium, 1044 through 1060, which is not terribly different from the American lager, which is the Bud Miller, the big boy beers. But then looking over here at the light lagers, 1028, that is much lower, 1028 to 1040. So substantial reduction in original gravity. But probably
do you know any that are actually 1028? I mean, that would be like a 2.5% beer.
I'm assuming that's like Keystone Light or, one of those piss water brands that you see.
I don't know of any 2.5% light lagers, but
What about when they had those dry styles? They came up with a couple of styles they called dry styles. Would they have just attenuated them down to nothing?
True. But
it depends on what it finishes
address
at.
the original gravity, though. So bottom
Yeah, but
line
I'm
is,
saying if they could get the final gravity down so far with those dry beers, I mean, that would make a very dry beer if they get that final gravity down way down. And so if you start at 1028, get it down to, down close to water attenuation, you'd still have some alcohol.
Yeah, just looking at a calculator, if you start at 1028 and go all the way down to 1, which is probably unrealistic, your alcohol's like 3.7. So it's still, I guess it's in the range, but yeah, it's a pretty small beer.
The Heineken Light Lager is 2.5%.
so anyhow, going quickly through the rest of the parameters, final gravities, reasonably similar. The SRM is clearly darker for the premium pale lager, the real pills, as opposed to our interpretation over here. And then the ABVs, the Czech Premium Pale is very similar to our standard American lager, but it's obviously way larger than the American light beers. But the biggest and most telling element in terms of the vital statistics is the IBU. The bitterness of these real pills are very substantial, whereas for the Americans, they're almost inconsequential. You can taste the bitter or perceive the bitterness, but there isn't much. So that's a big difference.
10 IBUs is classified as barely perceptible.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're in that range.
Yes. Okay, let's look at the other big differences. And that comes in the form of the ingredients. For the real pills, you're talking about real identifiable and flavor-driven hops for both flavor and aroma. All malt, no adjuncts, and then a Czech lager yeast, which has its own, character. And compare that to the fact that you've got 2 and 6 row barley, but then I believe in all American lager cases, you're also dealing with a rice or corn adjunct addition to help lighten the beer, lighten the flavor. These grain adjuncts really provide very little flavor to the finished beer. They're very clean. The corn does have a bit of corniness. For instance, I am having this Miller Genuine Draft, and I'm getting a hint of corniness out of that. So
that would be from DMS, not necessarily from the corn sugar.
And that, I guess that's not a surprise.
Yeah, I talk a little bit. I get a little geeky on DMS once you throw it back to me.
Sure.
I got a cool chart from Kunz's book to show.
And then the other big thing, in the Pilsner Urquell, you will get hit in the face and in the nose and in the tongue with a huge amount of spicy, floral, herbal hoppiness, which is really delightful. Whereas you go over to the American versions and you've got none to like. So, And with regard to the malt character, as I said, all 100% malt for the Czech Premium Pale. You get a lot of rich, complex, and bready flavors. Whereas in the American lagers, you're looking at some, you're not getting much in the way of any flavors.
grainy.
So yeah, grainy.
Yeah, grainy and little DMS.
And that's clean. So let's talk about one other item, the water quality. And in fact, it's not terribly different. So here are the water profiles for, I would call 3 world-class centers here. Of course, Pilsen, where the Pilsner brand, style originated. Their water has extremely low. I mean, this is pretty much RO water kind of levels, very low. The one thing I can say is that Pilsner Urquell, at least, does employ some gypsum in their brewing water. So more than likely, this 8 parts per million sulfate level is probably in truth higher, as is probably the calcium, but probably not a bunch higher. Contrast that with the Milwaukee water, this is Lake Michigan water. Really fairly low calcium, fairly low magnesium, almost no sodium, very modest sulfate and chloride. Now let's look at St. Louis, the home, of course,
Martin,
Milwaukee.
Martin, is this their treated water profile, or is this
Yes.
like the city water
Yes.
profile? This is their
This
treated
is
water
the
profile.
city water. So of course, Milwaukee is the home of Miller Brewing. And so my lovely genuine draft came directly from Milwaukee. And of course, St. Louis is the home of Anheuser-Busch Budweiser. And let's look at the differences there. First, in terms of calcium, very similar. Of course, calcium imparts very little flavor. Magnesium has the opportunity to impart some flavor, but they're really quite similar. The sodium is a little bit different, but this is not an alarming level of 35 parts per million in the Mississippi water that St. Louis uses. So not a big deal there, but look at the difference in the sulfate. So Miller, and I taste this very distinctly. Miller beers tend to be much softer. They finish a little bit more malty and fuller, where compared to the Budweiser products with the higher sulfate content, they always finish much drier. And this is a big difference. You know, I can tell you right now that so a thin pinch of gypsum between your thumb and forefinger, add that to a pint of beer, and that amount of gypsum mixed in with the beer, in your glass, adds roughly 100 parts per million. So you could literally take a Miller and create some of the same perceptions just by taking a thin pinch of gypsum, adding it to a pint of the beer, and mix that in, and it will dissolve completely. And you will see how much dryness that imparts. So that's a really nice technique that you can try.
Yeah, just make sure you don't do that with the sodium chloride.
Yes. No. And
that will burn.
Yes.
So you can do it with the sulfate, but not the chloride.
So that is all I've got, Ron. It's back in your court.
All right. So hey, on your water profile, you're telling us that was the water profile of the city water.
Yes.
But that's today's treated city water, or is there an assumption that that's the water that they used back when they made these beers?
The water sources haven't changed.
Okay.
And the treatment does not change the ionic profiles. So the only thing that changed was the addition of chlorination, so that it's a safe water to drink. Won't kill you.
And if you got a nice clean glass, and which you should, always make sure you double wash your glasses by hand. Even with a Miller Lite, which doesn't have much head retention, still getting some nice lacing off of it, surprisingly.
And of course, I did. So there's a bit.
But boy, there is not much to that beer. It was nice and cold, so it was refreshing. It sort of tastes like beer. It's sort of like beer flavored water, but it's well made. You have to give them that. They make this stuff really, really well. Maybe not what the Europeans meant for it to be like, but it's made really well, and it quenches the thirst, and it's cheap. It does its job, I guess. So the International Pale Lagers, I mentioned these already. You hardly ever see this beer anymore, but like Michelob Original Lager, they went back to their pre-prohibition recipe, and it's all barley. This still doesn't have the hops, and it probably doesn't have the amount of barley. But if you can ever find it, it's a good pre-pro Pilsner, and probably falls a little more into that International Pale Lager category, which is a little more malt character, little less adjunct character, probably more like that first or second step as the beer was changing when it first came over here in the mid 1800s.
Ron, have you had I haven't seen a Michelob in the store forever.
It's been a while. I used to use them in my classes all the time. I will admit the last year or year and a half, I guess, it's been hard to find.
And you
not even sure if they make it anymore.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, but it was around. I mean, this was a fairly new package that they had about a year and a half ago. But I haven't seen it since the times I've been looking for it. So I've actually been using, when I do this part in my classes, I've been using there's a couple of them I've used. One of them is Yuengling. Yuengling's Golden Pilsner, I think they call it. And yeah, it's a pretty good pre-pro Pilsner, what I would call a pre-pro Pilsner. So you might want to check that one out if you're into studying this sort of stuff. Dimethyl sulfide, DMS. That is that sweet corn-like flavor aroma that you find in many beers, especially the American lagers. It's produced in just about every beer. It's just a matter of whether it comes up to the threshold that you can taste it, and that partially depends on, of course, the brewing process, but as well as the other flavors in beer. So if you got, a flavorful beer, it's pretty easy to cover up a low level of DMS. But if you don't have much other flavor going on, like in a Miller Lite, then it's pretty hard to cover up a little bit of a corny flavor. To understand this, I'm going to try not to get too deep in the weeds on DMS, but it's certainly an important aspect of any of the pale lagers. Pale grains like corn, pale barley, have a precursor which is called S-methylmethionine, SMM, and it is the SMM that converts into DMS when it's cooked. So basically corn, being a light grain, is loaded with SMM, and when you cook corn, that is basically the flavor that comes out, which is why DMS tastes like corn. It's also in beans and various other vegetables and things, or grains, I should say, legumes. So when those things are cooked, whether it's the grain itself or the liquid that comes off of that grain, as we have in our boil kettles and wort, when you cook those things, the SMM is what converts into DMS. Little DMS is okay, even in a beer like this, when you can taste it, as long as it's low. It's only when it gets up into a higher level that it can start tasting like corn chips, like Fritos, dog paws, And then if it gets too high, it even gets up into a rotten asparagus type range or shrimp, briny. It takes on a lot of different character when it gets strong. Now, it should go away if you make the beer right and you do all the things we've talked about, like boil with the lid off because it's a volatile. So when you boil, the DMS vents off with the steam. And as long as you don't have a hood or something like that where the steam condenses back to a liquid and falls back into your kettle, you should be getting rid of that DMS. But believe it or not, that is a problem with some small craft breweries. They have a hood. They're producing all this steam. They have a hood, but they don't have a fan that's sucking it out. So basically they get these drips just constantly running back from the hood back into the kettle.
And there's often a drip ring inside the exhaust stack that collects that and keeps it from dripping back into the kettle.
That would be better. That would be better. So anyway, good boil, just like we've always said. And if anyone's interested, I'll get a little deeper into this. I wrote a big, long thing about it when Brewlosophy said, we did a boil with the lid on, and we let a couple people taste it, and they couldn't tell the difference. So therefore, DMS is not a thing.
That's bullshit.
It
depends on the grain.
That's not real science, folks.
Exactly.
So DMS is a thing. This is from Kunz's book. This one, the $200 job. Hopefully they don't mind that I use it in this presentation.
Yeah, what choice did they have?
This shows a couple things. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds, but DMS is an interesting subject, especially when we're talking about these golden lagers. SMM converts into three things. It is not just a straight precursor into DMS. It is a precursor that goes into DMS, DMSP, which is DMS precursor, and
which is SMM.
Dimethyl sulfoxide, right? So it goes into those three things. And here's what happens in your boil. So this is timeline of your boil down here. First 15 minutes or so, most of your DMS boils off. And you come down to this lower level. So then throughout your boil, you're at this really low level, but you don't realize you've got this creeper, the DMSP, that is slowly coming down. So after about an hour of boiling, this DMSP is just now converting into DMS. So if you shut your boil down right there, you still got this guy that's just now ramping up its DMS production. Now, if you still have a good whirlpool, and you're venting off a lot of steam still, then that's going to get extracted as long as it didn't get too high, of course. But this whole thing about, DMS isn't a thing, don't worry about it. Science and brewing says it is a thing. If you have good luck with it and you boil with your lid on, so be it. But this is what the science says. And it says we still have to worry about this precursor that is slowly developing into DMS that may be converting later. And then we have this whole other thing with dimethyl sulfoxide, which can actually convert into DMS during fermentation. So
the thing,
good long rolling boil is going to help get rid of all of this stuff is sort of the bottom line.
And actually, that rather extensive article that I did on boiling explains that it's actually a function of the type of grain that you're using. So if you're using the very palest of grains, i.e. the Pilsner malts, lager malts, say 1.5 to maybe 2.5 Lovibond malts, they will carry more SMM, or AKA this DMS precursor. However, when you get into the pale malts, which are say 3 and 4, or maybe even 5 Lovibond, all of that SM or most of that SMM has been converted in the malting process directly to DMS. So that grain still has DMS in it, but as this graph points out, a good 15 to 30 minutes worth of boiling, of open boiling, will immediately get that gone. It's strictly when you're dealing with a Pils malt, that's when you have this little
the green line
that's going to potentially bite you in the ass, as Ron pointed out, after you end the boil.
Yeah.
And I'd add that, you know, a good long rolling boil doesn't mean a vigorously rolling boil, you know, as many of us do now. You know, the surface only barely sort of moves. And, you know, this aligns with a lot of commercial breweries like, you know, New Belgium, I think, was one of the first 20 years ago where they really don't even boil. They use those thin film boilers or whatever, where the wort's sort of just rolling over it at sub-boiling temperature. You do that for an hour and you don't have to boil, essentially.
You're still getting steam though, right, Tom?
You're still, that thin layer is still able to off-gas the DMS or whatever.
Exactly.
Off-gas, yeah.
It's the exchange with the atmosphere that's all important.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be rolling steam as long as you have a good exchange
Yes.
air. So like those Calandria China caps.
Yep.
Those are different though than the thin film boilers.
No, they're not. No, they are not.
I would argue
absolutely not.
Arguments later. Okay, well, anyway.
So one thing I want to just point out here, Ron, if I could, is the stripping. Is that what it says down there in the lower right? Stripping?
Stripping, yes.
Yeah, so I'm curious as to what that is in the German context. The only thing I'm familiar with, and Martin, I don't know if you were there, but when MCAB was in St. Louis, probably in '99 or something, we got a tour of the Anheuser-Busch pilot plant.
Yeah, with that ripple thing.
Yeah, with the whole brewer. And, you know, we'd always heard in, 90s homebrewing that Anheuser-Busch always had this thing where they injected air and dropped the beer down 2 floors on the swirling thing. And so there were some homebrewers at the time trying to replicate that to make good lagers. And, we're just really, maybe, it was probably a bit of a unsuccessful path to go down, but it was cool to see those things in person where they dropped the wort like 2 or 3 floors, blowing hot air up through it, which you would normally think is just oxidizing the heck out of your beer. But that's part of Anheuser-Busch's process. And I think it is, it's a after boil stripping process is what they describe it as.
Is it straight air or is it CO2 they're pushing up through there?
It's air. Yeah. It surprises everybody. It's air.
Huh. I am not familiar with that. And that may be what the stripping is. I kind of assumed that they just meant that was the whirlpool process and that the whirlpool was, as it's rotating and off-gassing and still putting off steam, that it was kind of still stripping some DMS, but not under boiling conditions. But that was a speculation. I have the book. I'll go back and look.
Yeah, you might just Google Anheuser-Busch because you'll get a lot of hits on their process.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. And if anyone's more interested, I can copy and paste that little thing that I did. And Martin's done extensive stuff on this, but it's an interesting topic. That's the bottom line. Look into it and understand the ramifications of SMM and DMS. So let's go back in time a little bit, talk about these early pale lagers. I'm going to be controversial here a little bit because I go against the grain in what BJCP and a lot of brewing books and folks have taught over the years. I think they're wrong. So hear me out, decide what you think, but some consider Pilsner Quell the first pale lager. That's complete nonsense. And then others consider it the first Pilsner. I would say that's probably nonsense. But I would say it was certainly one of the first pale lagers and Pilsners that was commercially produced at high volumes and commercialized and marketed and sold. if we go back to the 1200s and 1400s, my friend Matthias, who owns Schlenkerla, he and I have chatted about this extensively. He's done like some thesis type work on it, and he has determined those rock cellars like he has there at Schlenkerla, and they're all around Franconia, that there's documentation in the brewing books and the commerce books going back as far as the 12 and 1400s that talk about better beer being produced from the people who had cellars. There are Hefners that were yeast handlers, and they prepared yeast for people that did baking as well as people who brewed at surface level and people who brewed in fermented in cellars, and they had different yeasts and different things. We didn't have a way of naming it back then, but there were people who were taking care of this yeast and providing. It was an industry, and there were certain people who did this, and they provided the yeast to the different brewers and the bakers of the time. And even as far back as the 1400s, there is talk of the Gelb beers, which is the yellow beers. So some of this concept of we didn't know what yeast was, it wasn't in the Reinheitsgebot, and therefore we didn't know what it was, and it was the magic spoon that did it, and we didn't have pale beers until the 1800s. And all that stuff. I think it's bullshit. It's complete bullshit. There were people, malting and brewing was an industry for hundreds of years. You studied the two of them together. And there were people making pale malts and experimenting with things like that. And everyone did unique things in their own breweries. You had these yeast handlers that were preparing and taking care of yeast. They certainly knew what it was. And there's documentation, like I said, about them calling out the people who had cellars made better beer. And there was like this big hubbub at City Hall because the people who had cellars made better beer than the people who didn't. And that gave them this advantage. And it was like all this crazy shit, right? And this is back in the 1400s. So Franconia was probably the birthplace of lagers. They have some of the oldest rock cellars in Europe, and it was probably in those rock cellars, which are naturally about 50 degrees or in the 40s in the summer, in the wintertime, and they're fermenting beer at that temperature. It's only logical that certain yeast strains would have survived and worked better for them, and that they would have then kept using them, not realizing that it had a different name and that sort of thing. They just did it. So anyway, small breweries were probably making these first lagers and the first pale lagers. We also do know that by the early 1700s, Belgium may have started it, but certainly in England, they had pale malt. They were using it to make, they were combining pale malt with crystal malts and darker malts to make their pale beers, which of course were, kind of amber colored.
What about like the air or wind malt or air malt or whatever it's called?
Yeah, it wasn't even that. It was going back to the first uses of coal.
Okay.
And coke. And they were also experimenting with those in Scotland for whiskey smoking. So we weren't burning trees the entire time. We did start burning cleaner fuels that didn't impart smokiness and color to the beer. So it's known that in the 1400s we were fermenting beers at cold temperatures in the rock caves of Franconia. We know that they were making yellow beers. We know that the cellar beers were better than the people who made beer upstairs. And we know that we had pale malt in existence by the early 1700s. So did we have the first pale lager? Did it take until 1842 and Pilsner Urquell to create the first true pale lager? Of course not. That's just silly. So here is the other thing. So here's Joseph Groll. This portly gentleman here, Bavarian brewer, not a famous Bavarian brewer. This guy worked for his dad's company in a little town about 100 miles, 70 miles west of or east of Munich. So he's in a little town working at his dad's little brewery, but he traveled extensively. He went to England. He looked at their malting techniques. He was a bit of an innovator. And he's the unsung hero here because this is the hired gun that was brought in from this little town in Bavaria, along with another Bavarian, to come over to Pilsen and build the brewery and then, so one Bavarian was to build the brewery. The other one, Joseph Groll, he was the one to handle malting and brewing. And remember, back in these days, up until actually recently, and even still at Weihenstephaner, you study malting and brewing together because that's the way it's always been done. So malting and brewing was one thing. It wasn't a separate industry. So Joseph Groll handled malting and brewing. The other guy handled the brewery building. Nobody makes a big investment in a giant new brewery on the hope and a prayer that you're going to develop some new beer. That's more bullshit. You can't tell me that this guy wasn't already making this style of beer. He's over there close to the Czech border. He's probably using some Saaz hops even maybe. He's been to England. He's seen the lighter kilning that they're using on malts. And he was probably making these beers. Why did they hire him? Why did they hire this nobody from a little town in Germany to come over on a contract deal for 5 years to get them up and running? He was already making them. He had to be, right? I mean, nothing else makes sense. So there's no doubt in my mind that these pale lagers, probably maybe Helles style, was already being made in Bavaria by the early 1800s. They hired Groll in 1839. We already had all the makings. We had pale malt. We had cold lagering and fermenting. We had all the pieces and parts there. Probably lots of small brewers were doing it. He wasn't too far away from them. They probably heard about him. I mean, it's a lot of speculation, but we do know they hired a guy from a little brewery in Bavaria to come over and set up a very large operation. And there had to be a reason why they did that. You never read about
this
that.
Original Pilsner, is it a function of maybe just the hops and the use of those hops?
Well, assuming he's making sort of a pale lager, but the Germans like malty beers, always kind of have. So assuming he's making sort of a pale lager that was pretty dang tasty in his father's brewery, and Pilsner Urquell hires him with the idea of make us one of those, but use our hops. We want to, because we grow these super awesome hops here, spicy and, just make those a little more front and center, and voila. And that was kind of the beer. So then still going back in time, the big Munich breweries, they certainly had the capability to produce pale lagers, but being stubborn Germans, they were very stuck in their traditions of making, Märzens and Dunkels and these darker beers that they had made for a long time. This is funny, the small breweries in Munich started making a pale lager again, I say Helles with a question mark. I don't know. I know they made a pale lager. This made the big breweries very angry. The head of Augustiner, one of the oldest and biggest of the Munich breweries, he kind of reprimanded these small breweries for making this pale lager, saying they're just advertising for Pilsner, right? So basically, the big Munich breweries, they were just holdouts. They were the big, breweries of the day. They had their tradition. They had their way of doing things. They thought this Pilsner thing was a fad, even though all around them, people were gobbling it up, including other small breweries making it in and around Bavaria. So it wasn't until Spaten broke ranks in 1895 and then they made a Helles. And then here's the other crazy thing. German brewers in the U.S. were making pale lagers in the 1850s. So
would those
they didn't make a pale lager in Munich by the big breweries until 1895. But it was all around them though, going back to 1842.
But Ron, those
for 50 years they held out on this. Say it again, Martin.
But Ron, the U.S. German brewers making these pale lagers, do you think that they were all malt or were they adjunct like we're seeing here?
Well, as I said before, they were probably adjunct just because we didn't have a huge, in that era, we did not have a big barley crop. It was not a native grain. So nor did we have a lot of hops. So if you're looking at importing most of that stuff, by the late 1800s, we actually had a pretty good hop and barley agricultural industry. But in the beginning of it, we did not. So you're looking at importing almost everything. So if you can back off on the malt and use some local corn, and you can back off on the hops, these folks don't know what beer's supposed to taste like anyway. You can still make a pretty good beer by backing off on some of those things. But yes, they were making a pale lager, probably a Helles style beer once again, back in the 1850s and 1860s. Even though they weren't doing it by the 6 big breweries in Munich were not doing it. So Pilsner Urquell starts doing it in 1842. Big commercial operation, right? They weren't doing that first. They had to have the small breweries doing it, probably going back to the 1830s, 20s even, right? Before someone decides, let's hire this guy and let's build this big brewery making that kind of beer. So 1842, Pilsner Urquell's doing it. By the 1850s, it had already come to America, and we're making pale lagers. But the 6 holdouts, the old stalwarts in Munich, kept saying, no, this is a fad. This is going to pass. And they just kept holding out on it until Spaten, like I said, finally broke ranks in 1895 and said, screw this, man. We're going to make one of these. And so they made their pale lager not as hoppy as the Pilsner. So this is why the history books say Helles came later. But we're talking about the big commercial breweries. And the big commercial breweries are the last ones to do any of this stuff.
So Ron, it sounds to me like
we know it was like back in the 1880s that the guy at Augustiner was, getting mad at the little Munich breweries for making a pale lager, and told them that they were just advertising for Pilsner, right? So it's a crazy history. But what I'm saying is we probably had pale lagers being made in and around Bavaria and Franconia, going back perhaps into the late 1700s, early 1800s. The first big commercially produced one was Pilsner Urquell. They used their hops and made it a more hoppy focused beer. But by 1850s, 1860s, lots of little breweries were making a pale lager, and they were making pale lagers here in America already.
But,
so it was
no,
just
so
this
Ron-
weird, it was just this weird stubbornness of the 6 big breweries in Munich that kept them from making it. It wasn't that they couldn't.
But it sounds like this is a branding exercise. PU did an excellent branding exercise earlier than everybody else.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. They were the big guy on the block that came out with a golden Pilsner. A golden
And there
lager.
must have been some money behind PU for it to start. They brought
Yeah,
over.
there was basically a consortium of breweries that came together. They were all making shitty beer, and the people revolted, and there was like this big, almost like a Boston Tea Party thing, where they dumped like hundreds of barrels at City Hall of beer, and the people and the restaurants and bar people, they all demanded better beer. And it was shortly after that all the breweries, the 6 kind of big breweries in town, all kind of got together and formed a consortium. And they said, let's fix this. Let's pool our money. Let's build a big brewery. Let's all come together on this. And let's go get that guy over there that makes those golden lagers in Bavaria, and get him over here to help us make these beers. And he was a hired gun. He had a 5-year contract to establish the brewery, establish the malting, perfect the beer, and then he was out, went back to his dad's little place. Matter of fact, fascinating story. He died in 1877, so he never got to see a golden lager produced by the big breweries of Munich. So it's like he died never knowing what he had created, and that here we are talking about it, right? He probably had no idea he was going to be in the history books. So anyway, so the Munich Helles, I think it was the precursor. I'm thinking this malty pale lager was the most likely precursor, not the counter, as it says elsewhere in books. I think this was probably the precursor to the Pilsner Urquell that we know of. So it was pale. It was made around Munich. Today it's the beer of the beer gardens. It's served in the big wooden barrels by the liter, all barley, very malty, flavorful, but not a lot of hops, just enough bitterness to sort of balance it out. The European Pilsners, on the other hand, they're, as Martin told us earlier, those get into the higher IBUs, getting up, they can be 30-ish, but most are in that 40 to 45 IBU range, which is kind of that wonderful sweet spot of bitterness. It's 40 to 45 IBUs is right there where it's a nice bitter beer, but it's not wrecking the palate. It's just drying you out enough that you want to keep drinking. So it's a really wonderful level of bitterness. And that's where we find most of these Pilsners, as well as the American Pale Ale. There's a reason why a lot of these beers land in that range. You get higher than that and you start to get into the palate wrecker, palate fatigue level of bitterness, but around 40 to 45, pretty good level. Okay. So the Czech Pilsner, first one from the town of Pilsen, thus the name Pilsner. I've already talked about Joseph Groll, probably already making those in 1842. They hired him in 39, 42. They released the first Pilsner, and then he had a couple more years with them. And I think by 44, 45, he was back in his little town brewing at his dad's business that he later inherited when his father died, and lived his whole life there after going and creating this masterpiece. So there's others. There's Budvar, which in the Czech Republic is known as Budweiser or Budvar. Over here it's called Czechvar. But in the Czech Republic, this is the only place on earth that Budweiser has not been able to sue for the name because it keeps going to court, and the courts keep saying, you weren't first here. The original Budweiser was from here, and you're the copy. So anyway, they're
You get the
rich.
middle finger.
So they're sort of rich. The Czech Pilsners are such a unique beer. This is the other reason why I think that the Munich Helles was the precursor, because they're rich and malty, like the Munich Helles. They use decoction mashing, which was the German technique. It's just everything about the base of the beer, except for the hops, screams that it was, kind of a German lager. So they're rich and malty like Munich lagers, but they also have these hops that come in at a level you can smell and taste, and that 40 to 45 level of bitterness. This one, some people hate or love or whatever, but those Czech Pilsners, there's a reason why the BJCP set all of those aside. Otherwise, they could have just put them into the international Pilsner or lager category. But all of those Czech beers, all those Czech lagers have their own category because of the optional diacetyl. They like diacetyl in the Czech Republic. Now, I think this is a newer trend. I don't think they necessarily loved it in 1842. The beer that you have in the cellars at Pilsner and Quell do not have the level of diacetyl that the beers have elsewhere upstairs. So it's something the Czech Republic and the Czech people have just come to like in a beer.
And diacetyl is a thing of, I guess, immature beer, right?
Slight incomplete fermentation. And it's something that they literally strive for. It's in their craft beers. It's in their IPAs. It's in their dark lagers. It's a desired characteristic. And here, American brewers, German brewers, home brewers, we're all taught that it's such an offensive, character. I think one of the reasons why people harp on it so bad is because it's one of the things that is easiest to detect. And so people get to show off their superiority by saying, oh, I get a little diacetyl. This is awful. But yet there's beers all over Franconia in Germany that have diacetyl. There's English beers where it's acceptable. Scottish beers, it's acceptable. All the Czech beers, diacetyl is acceptable. So it's like, yeah, it's awful, except for in all those places where it's not. So I always tell people, you need to decide for yourself whether you truly hate diacetyl or if you hate diacetyl because you've been told to hate it. At a low level, it's not that offensive. It tastes like, butterscotch mostly. So at low levels, it can mesh right with caramel malt, toffee notes, and things like that. It adds to the creaminess and body of the beer until it gets too high. If it gets too high, then it becomes slick. At the point it becomes slick, that's a bad mouthfeel. But diacetyl by itself at low levels can actually add some character to a beer. And whether you love it or hate it or aren't sure, in the Czech Republic, they don't mind it at all. So today's Pilsner or Quell and lots of the Czech lagers do have some diacetyl in there, which is just a slight incomplete fermentation. Now I visit this, several of you on here perhaps have been on my trips. I visit the brewery each summer. It's such a cool thing, drinking the unpasteurized, unfiltered version down in the cellars, directly out of the old lagering tanks. And I rent a room these days. They have these shalandas, which are these old brewery break rooms that they've set up down there, and you can rent them by the hour. And the whole time you're there, they just bring you unlimited amounts of the unfiltered, unpasteurized Pilsner Urquell. And you sit and eat Czech goulash, and it's quite an amazing time.
Ron, is the flavor markedly different from what we're getting in the can here?
Yes. It
In what ways?
practically no diacetyl, a more pronounced hop bitterness and aroma because it's so fresh, it's unfiltered. So there's much more hop character. It's cleaner. These are the beers that are fermented down in these open vessels. So this is, they call it their Czech beer, test beer. It's the beer that they always go back to say, are we making the beer that we used to, right? So I don't know if that's true or not, but they open ferment it, and I'll show you some more pictures on that in a second, but they do open ferment it, and then they age it in the old wood barrels that are, they have the wood tar on them, so you don't pick up wood character. So it's very unique experience. I want to talk about this just a second. There are different pours for the beer. Normally you get the one in the middle. This guy right here, they call their trained bartenders that work around the world, but they have a school that you can go to and you are trained. People who have big accounts with Pilsner Urquell, like in Chicago and places, they will actually send their bartenders, if they have a good one that's been with them forever, they'll send them for training. You have to have the special type of, control valve on the tap in order to do these mixes. The foam is not just regular foam. It's this really dense, almost like a milkshake type foam. Here's the three pours. The normal one is the Hadinka, and that's where they have about 2 inches in the Pilsner Urquell glass, like I got here. The Milko is not just a glass of foam. It is a crazy sensation of like drinking a beer smoothie. And it's really creamy and smooth and the lowest amount of bitterness. This one is considered the smooth regular pour. And then you have the Chotin, which is a pour where they release very little CO2, and releasing very little CO2 keeps that carbonic acid in the beer, and that helps accentuate the bitterness, so the crispness, they call it. So basically this pour is the most bitter. This is the regular pour, which is more balanced, and then this crazy pour is the one for like old people and children, that's more like drinking a milkshake, and it's lost most of its bitterness. So I'm going to go ahead and pour mine. I'll take myself off of share just long enough to show you my glass. I've got the actual Pilsner Urquell glass. Not sure you can see the logo and stuff on there. Down in the bottom of it, you can see the gates of the brewery. Just these beautiful glasses, very bowl-shaped, half-liter glasses. We'll try to get a nice head on there. Release a lot of that CO2. Releasing that CO2 means it's not going to go in your belly, and it's taking away some of the bitterness. Beautiful. Just like the movies.
I got the same mug, I think, Ron. Cheers.
No, you got the old school one.
Old school.
That's the mug they used to use. Yeah,
This
one is
You know,
more-
I own, probably 500 pieces of glassware. This is the only one that was ever pilfered. And it wasn't by me, though, but it was pilfered from Prague. So.
So give that a big smell and taste.
Guys, got this mug.
As
I like chocolate.
they say in the Czech Republic, nostraví, or you have to be a little more guttural, nostraví.
Oh.
I feel like I've got the mustache for the Czech look. I just realized.
Got it.
Man, that's such a flavorful beer. And then bitterness doesn't happen immediately. Bitterness takes about 10 seconds to develop. So you have to give that a little bit of time after you swallowed that first bitter beer to have it kick in. Those salivary glands start spitting at you. Your throat starts getting that tingle. But give it a little time to fully develop. That's so nice. Malty up front, little touch of diacetyl, but I don't mind it at all. A little sweet, almost a little caramel note to it. And you've got that spicy herbal hop character that's both in the nose and mid palate. You start tasting it. You taste it a lot on that exhale, especially through the nose, the hops you do. And then about 10 seconds after you've swallowed it, here comes that wonderful bitterness that right about now makes me want to take another drink. Amazing beer. Great experience. So here's just some pictures I'm going to blow through. Here's the beautiful Pilsner Quell campus. You can see the water tower way down there, way down there, the malting facility. This is the brewery right here. This area right here is the visitor center, and underneath the visitor center, actually it's sort of in between these. The cellar is sort of in between these two buildings. There's a restaurant over here. So it's kind of this whole complex, big gift shop. You can spend a bit of time. Actually, they moved the gift shop. It's not here anymore. It's down by these overhang things, and they made it much larger on the last trip there. There's that beautiful gate that you have on the can and on the glassware. This was last year's trip. Some of you might know Fred Molnar. Remember Fred Molnar, Master Judge? He was on my trip last summer. Luke Franklin and his wife, they're local. Some of you might know them. John Ernie, he was one of my IUPUI students. Put it on his bucket list.
Luke's not
Put it
local.
on his bucket list and wanted to come on one of my trips. And as soon as he got a real job and started making money, him and his buddy came on one of my trips. So anyway, water tower. Of course, they put you on one of these buses to take you back and show you the bottling facility. One of the old rail cars. Here's the big plant, the bottling packaging facility where they're packaging multiple brands and doing cans and bottles and kegs. And I mean, it's like a Anheuser-Busch type facility.
I saw that Gambrinus is one of their brands.
Gambrinus is one of their brands. They're, I think, part of Asahi now. They were part of Miller. Seems like every year I go over there, there's a different logo. But I think right now they're part of Asahi brewery. Anyway, just big. I mean, it's always cool to see these giant automation. Look at these big bottling lines. Here you got brown bottles over here. Over here you got green bottles. Depends on which market it's going to. Pretty cool exhibit area that they have. You know, they've sort of made it up like a, yeah, you have to do a tour to do this, but but they have, you know, museum like displays and things like that. It's pretty cool. So you see the manufacturing facility. You go through this. This is talking about their water, and you walk through and the floor moves around on you as the water's rippling by. Just, you know, silly stuff like that. But it's fun. It's a nice tour. This is the old brewery. So this is the old coppers that are no longer used. And then these are the new ones. And what was funny is this closest one used to just be a circle on the floor. And they finally added it in the last year and a half, I guess. But to put this in perspective, look at this control console right here. Imagine a human being standing right here at this control console. Okay? That's how big these friggin' tanks are.
They're monsters.
They're big boys. Now, just off to the right, so I put this in, you can't see it very well, but just off to the right of these, you have the cookers, the kettles, and you've got the two levels for doing the decoction that they do. So you can see that there. All right, beautiful, beautiful copper. They still do decoction. They still do their own malting. One of the few breweries in the world that still does their own malting. This is kind of cool. This shows their process, and what's neat here is it shows the decoction. See the 3 times? So you go from this copper to this copper, and then it loops back to this copper, and then comes to this copper, then goes to that copper, and it says 3 times. So there's your triple decoction. And then from there, it goes here, which is basically the silver kettles are basically lauter tons, because after the lauter ton, it goes back to the copper for boiling. And then after boiling, it goes back to the stainless kettles for whirlpool.
Also, look at in the middle of the boil kettle. It's got that spray. If you look in,
Here,
Yep.
it's got like the
That
Calandria. It's got the
exactly.
yeah,
that
it's got
helps.
the China cap.
That is intended to get maximum surface area between the wort and the off gassing.
Yeah. So anyway, just it's kind of cool. And then this next one, this shows the legend, right, in different languages for what everything is. But I basically just walked you through it. But it is kind of cool to see that they're still doing that. And then after you see the beautiful coppers and the stainless, then you get to go down in the cellars, and this is what we wait for, right? So you go down in the damp, dank, wet cellars. There we see Joe and Teresa and Sandy and maybe a few other friends. Just look back in there. It's just such a cool place to be down in these cellars, especially something so big and still being used like here. Here they put some lights on this one, but basically you would have had, the wooden vessels sitting up there. This is fascinating. I have to tell you about this. This is at the head of the cave system, at the top of the cave system. This chamber right here is probably about 40 feet by 50 feet tall, like maybe 40 feet by 40 feet by maybe 50 feet tall, okay? And up there at the top, you can see daylight. And what they did was all winter long through that hole, they shoveled ice and snow. Filled up this entire chamber, just packed it in with ice and snow and made a gigantic 40 by 40 by 50 foot ice cube. And that ice cube, cold air drifts down So this is at the head of the cave system. So you got that cold air coming off of it and going down just to make the caves a little colder. And then there was in the cobbles, there was a trench that came off of it. So as that ice water would slow, as the months got warmer, that ice water that would slowly drip off of this ice cube would channel into this this little channel, and then that also went down through the cave system. So you got the ice water dripping off, you got the cold air drifting down, and if they were lucky, you know, this thing's finally melting when it's time to start repacking it again the next winter.
So Ron, they don't do this anymore?
No, they
Okay.
don't. I assume. I mean, the caves are plenty chilly down in there, but I'm assuming they also augment that as needed with some coolers. Matter of fact, I think I recall seeing some coolers down there. So yeah, they don't pack this with ice anymore. It'd be pretty cool if they did, though.
Yeah.
So here's some of the open fermenters that are still in use down there. Little look there. And finally, we get to taste it. So we walk down this, always walk down this row right here where these are the horizontal tanks still being used for lagering, conditioning, and pouring that fresh, unfiltered, unpasteurized version right out of the cellar. So you can see the cloudiness. It's one of those places I love. I learned to love Keller beers.
Well, there's typically a lot of hop bitterness attached to all that haze. So is that the case here?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. And flavor.
Right, yeah, sure.
There's hop flavor and bitterness
Ah.
still in there. So that's why it's there's more malt character, there's more hop aroma and flavor,
No haze.
there's more bitterness. It's a very unique thing. So then this is one of the Shalandas that they opened up a couple of years ago. So this is like I said, I rent this room out for an hour or two or more, depending on the size of the group, what I can afford, that sort of thing. And basically, at the end of the tour, they set my group aside, and then they say, okay, you come with me, and then we go to this room, and there's a couple people assigned to the room, and they just serve us up this wonderful Czech goulash, and just keep bringing us these pitcher after pitcher of the unfiltered, unpasteurized beer. So there you see Sandy and BJ, and this is, which one is it? Chris Mills, Ryan Mills' brother. I think he might be in here. Anyway, you might know some of these folks in here. There's Joe, Teresa, some other Indianapolis folks. And you see the copper pitcher
Ryan.
there that they use. It's such an incredible experience, man, to just hang out down there and just drink this incredible beer and eat awesome food. And there's a great look at the mug and how hazy it is. And here's these
There's
beautiful,
Luke.
cool old copper pitchers that they use. I think Tom first mentioned, he said, you think they use those to knock down the sulfur? And it's like, I don't know. It's a great idea, though.
That's true.
It is a very young beer. Might be a little high on the sulfur at this point. So maybe the copper helps sort of tone that down.
Yeah, it's an instantaneous reaction.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm gonna play this. I'll see if it plays, and if you can see it, it's just a short little video. May or may not work on your end.
It's moving.
I'll kill the sound on it. These guys that work down in the cellar, man, they know no English at all. It's just hand gestures and figuring out what each other wants. But
Oh,
they always he's saying, hey, you want to pour some? You pour some. Give me your camera. You pour it. So then I filled up the rest of the pitcher, and that's a different video. Then this one's pretty cool. If I can get it to play.
and,
So,
and
you know,
Ron,
it's so cool to be in there when the tours are all gone. And it's just you and the workers, and you just feel like you got, you know, the cave system to yourself. And then watch this room that I take us to. It's like we're just wandering around these ancient old rock cellars, and then we come up to, they have two of these rooms that they've built. And it's like walking into the party room. So just cool stuff.
looks good. That was supposed to have happened a month ago.
Well, back in the summer, at least for me. So just some shots here. Another good shot of the cloudiness of the beer. This is just fun. It's the men's restroom. So you really get the feel you're in a cave when you're just doing your business. Always got to take some pictures after we catch a great buzz down in the cellars. Back up top. Classic pour. Okay. So beyond that, just a couple more slides here. Joe and Teresa, obviously, and we are over on the other side of the bridge, other side of the river from Prague now. We're in Prague. And so we're over by the John Lennon painted wall. And there's a couple of really nice spots over there to get this beer in this cool mug. And if you look a little closer, you see that here we're drinking Budweiser. Okay, so in this area, this is not Czech Republic, but in the Czech Republic, in Prague, and then north of Prague, in that little overhang part of Germany, where you have Dresden and Leipzig, and then on up you would get to Berlin. The beer styles change in Prague and that part of Germany, and everything is like light or dark. What do you want, light or dark? And if you want light is Czech Pilsner or Northern Pils if you're in Germany. If you're in the Czech Republic, the dark is the Czech dark lager. And if you're in Germany, it's a Schwarzbier. And it's basically the choice everywhere. And they're little breweries, they're big breweries, but the choice at every place you stop in Dresden, Leipzig, on up through to Berlin, as well as in Prague, that whole area, it's a light or dark. And it's either Czech or Northern German Pils and Schwarzbier or Czech dark lager. Czech dark lagers being a little sweeter than the slightly drier Schwarzbiers. This was actually, I believe, in Dresden, but it was just a great example of these two breweries I'd never heard of, but that was the options at this little restaurant that we stopped at. And then, even right here, even if you decide to take a beer spa in Prague, Prague's known for its beer spas, right? So even if you decide to take a beer spa, the choice is light and dark.
Yeah.
light and dark, right?
We ran into that in Austria too.
It's ideal for Tracy and I because she loves those Czech dark lagers, and I of course love the Czech Pilsners. So there you have it. And yes, I could do a whole session just on the experience of a Prague beer spa, but it's a pretty cool thing.
And Ron, were those pretty nice beers?
Yeah, Krosovici is I think a very nice beer. I heard years ago it used to be shit years ago, but they're pretty damn tasty beers today.
Yeah, those are awesome. They're one of my favorites, and there's a couple places in Prague where you can get their whole lineup, so you can have like the 10 Plato and 12 Plato and 13 Plato of the lights and darks. It's sort of fun.
But still light and dark, right?
And the one thing I forgot to put in here are the Tank Novas. I was going to put a picture of a Tank Nova. The Tank Novas are these places that get large. A tanker truck basically comes from Pilsner Quell or Krosovici or some of the other breweries, and they fill up these basically these big serving tanks. Big copper, stainless steel, decorative, giant serving tanks. And it's unpasteurized beer. It's usually filtered in the case of Pilsner Quell, but it is unpasteurized. So it hasn't gone through that cooking process, which of course destroys some part of the character and flavor of the beer. So the Tank Novas, these are really cool places in Prague and throughout the Czech Republic where they have that direct connection with the brewery. They get large amounts of the unpasteurized version. And I found one up in Dresden on my Christmas trip. We'll go to this place in Dresden that has Radaburger, which is the local Pilsner. And it's it's a Tank Nova, meaning they've got the big tanks delivered directly from the tanker trucks from the brewery, but instead of just the one beer, they actually have the unpasteurized regular beer and a Keller version of Radaburger.
But,
So
wait,
super, super cool.
wait, Ron, what happened to the picture?
Was it gone?
I don't know what's going on here.
We've got like a web page with a bunch of windows. You can see all your browsing history there. Not really. Hey, so while you're finding that, I'll say the Tank Nova pubs.
Did you guys see Tracy and the
No.
We
no.
did. Yeah, we did though. We saw Tracy in
Yeah,
the tub.
we did before.
and then it went away?
Yes.
When you went to the Dresden Tank Nova thing, it went away.
Okay. Well, anyway, I was on my last couple slides, and basically I was just going to talk about.
So, hey, if I can jump in on Tank Novas,
Yes.
I mean, those things, you got to go through so much beer. Not every place that sells Pilsner Quell can be a Tank Nova. You got to go through enough where it makes sense, where they bring in a tanker truck and fill it up. And they usually have two tanks because you don't want to, run dry
Right.
and not have it. So but you got to be turning them over. You can't like have a filled one there that you don't get to within a day or two. So
That's right.
I think they, adjust the fill too, based on what you're selling. But finding those is fun. And I'd say it's, having been in Prague a few times on my own, that's one of the only ways to stay sober is you can't just go to every, pub. And so I would only go to Tank Novas because then you have to walk some.
Yep. That's
Sober up a little in
That's a
between.
good strategy.
Wait. So how many gallons or barrels or hectoliters are we
So-
talking?
I think it varies. There's probably some minimum, but the interesting thing I've seen on my work trips to Florence, Italy, is there's a Tank Nova. They've sort of gone international with the concept. Now, I don't think it works as well, but there is a place called the Beer House Club, of all things, in Florence that is a Pilsner Quell Tank Nova. And so they, if you think about that, Florence to Prague is probably like, a 6-hour drive or something. It's several countries away, but given the distances over there, maybe it's more than that. I don't know, but they Phillips and Taker trucks and make some rounds in places that can go through it. But this place advertises the heck out of it. Now I've had some bad Pilsner Quels there that have obviously not been quite as fresh, and I think some of these places go out of favor or whatever. But anyway, they are trying to export the concept, I guess, is the bottom line.
Interesting. But we'll probably never see one here.
I don't know. Never say never. You never know.
Yeah, the closest we get is if you have a place like
In Chicago.
yeah, my friend's place up there, I'm drawing a blank, Kaiser Tiger up in Chicago, that's really keen on the Pilsner Quell. They will get a few kegs of the unpasteurized product FedExed in. So, it's a set night. They're going to have 3 kegs of it. It's marketed in advance.
And they go through that much?
They'll get some, they'll blow through 3 kegs in like 2 hours.
How big is this place?
That's pretty good size, but as soon as they put the word out that they're doing it, then everyone puts it on their calendar, and it's such an amazing beer. I mean, it's similar to the experience of being down in the cellars, and the beer. Dave Colt from Sun King. I mean, he went to. I told him about them doing it, and I was going to go to it. We were up there for FOBAB, and him and the Sun King crew joined me, and it's one of those things he talks about every time we see each other, right? It was like that was his favorite beer of that year, was that unpasteurized, fresh Pilsner Quell just blown in. It was like 7 days old or something, and you've got they've got the special taps for pouring it just right, and they've got the glassware, and you get the whole treatment. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, I'm trying to find. I know I've got a picture here. Of a Tank Nova. Might be able to find it. Nah, I can't find it. Anyway, they're just big tanks. Big tanks. So what I was going to say is Northern German Pils, just to finish up the Pils topic. Northern German Pils, drier, lighter, maybe a little more bitter, beers like Bitburger. And then I differentiate Northern German Pils from Bavarian, Southern German Pilsners, which are kind of more like tweeners in between the Northern Pils and the Czech Pils. Not as malty as the Czech Pils, but not as light and dry as Bitburger and the Northern or Western style Pils. Sort of in between there. And that would be like Augustiner. And all the breweries make them. They don't seem to like to sell them, but they all make them. And you get the eye roll sometimes if you try to order one, because they will tell you that Pilsner are for children and old people.
And you get the little glasses. Like you can't get a Pilsner in a mug. You get a dainty glass.
Yeah. See if my image pops up. Can you see that now?
Got it.
Yes. Oh yeah, the little teeny glass there.
Yeah, so that's Bitburger. That's a Northern German Pils, and it comes with the little doily and the little delicate glass. And they do the whole slow pour thing for Bitburger if you're in a good place, like Bierstadt Lagerhaus does. But then this is down in Munich, and one of the few places that you could actually get the Augustiner Pils on draft. And instead of coming in, a Willie Becker or a big mug, big, liter Moss, it comes in this type of glass with the little drip catcher.
Yeah, drip catcher.
And that's just what you get. You order a Pilsner, this is how it comes. And if you get a surly waiter, he will tell you, he'll roll his eyes and he'll say, "We don't drink Pils in Bavaria." Why do you make them? And why are they so freaking good? but they don't. They hate in public. They say they hate the style. It's Northern German. It's not Bavarian.
I have to think there's some like financial incentive too, like what
I
they're
don't know,
getting.
but
A lot of those guys are
Bavaria-
getting paid by the Maas, and it's probably a lower rate, and it's probably cutting into their income.
Nah, I
They'll
don't
get
think
pissed.
so. I think it's just Bavaria's Helles. That's their beer style. And elsewhere in Germany, they drink pills. So even though the Munich area breweries make Pilsner,
I got it.
it's not something that they promote, and you can hardly ever find it. You can hardly ever find it. It's hard to find on draft. You can find it in the grocery stores. You can buy it in bottles. But it's hard to find on draft.
You cramps.
Anyway, so that's the Southern style, and that's it for me. Sorry it was so long. Hope it was interesting, though.
Yeah, we're not over time, though.
It was
hope
excellent.
that everybody enjoyed this evening. Something approachable, comparable. I do intend to, since one of the benefits of these meetings is that we get to taste something different, but when we're virtual, gee, I don't want to go out and buy a six-pack of, some beer that I might not even like, and I'm sure you don't either. But this sharing concept that has been proposed, I think could be a good workable option. And we're
Concept
probably,
that, Martin, also cons. I know everyone's not near cons. I've been working with Dan Harper there. He's their beer guy. I've been working with him for all of these beer kits that I do for my beer class, because I've been teaching online since March. And I've got a kit put together where they go there and he puts together a kit of 14, 15, 16 beers, sells it in a box, and it's individual things of everything from Rodenbach to Schlenkerla. It's stuff that would take you forever to try to find. And then you might have to buy a larger bottle or something. So he's just super agreeable to this. And just about everything that they serve, they will sell in singles.
good.
So even if they have to break apart a six-pack, they will sell it, and they've got a whole gigantic shelf that once they've broken a six-pack apart, it goes on the singles shelf. And so just about anything you want, you can buy as a single there.
So I need to be contacting this Dan.
Yeah, I could send you his name, and and then you could say, hey, do you have this that we could buy in singles? I've got 20 people that are going to come and want it over the next week. And he'd say, I almost guarantee you, he would say, yeah, sure, no problem.
I'll also add, if anyone's been to the new,
I'll ask for it. Something like that. He's super agreeable, super nice guy. They have a great beer selection there in the first place. And I've also heard that Party Pack, I believe it is, down on the south side, I think they'll break apart a six-pack and sell singles of just about anything. So there are a few places where you can pick up singles.
I just went to the new Total Wine on 86th Street, and they do a bunch of singles. They have a crazy good selection. I mean, it kind of reminded me of Jungle Jim's a little bit.
Oh, yeah, the new place.
Yeah, Total Wine.
That's another great thought. Another great thought.
96th Street
An
Party
amazing
Pack
selection.
North. 96th Street Party Pack North also has tons of singles that you can buy and put together your own six-pack. That's over by the old Claddagh and the Scotty's place.
Yep.
So they do the same.
96th and Gray Road.
So I think both of those are great options. Either sharing, split a six-pack with someone and get 3 beers. As Michael Jackson used to say, you can evaluate a beer in a sip, but it's good to drink the whole glass to be sure. So
So to
maybe,
have 3 or 4 is a good thing too.
yeah. So Sometimes it takes a few beers to get used to something.
But one of the objectives here was to get interesting beers into people's hands, hopefully without having to buy a whole 6-pack, and having the opportunity to do that effectively. I mean, it would be great if we were going to be meeting in person, the club will support you, but I don't see that happening in the next probably 6 months.
Probably about right.
So we're probably stuck.
Maybe a little sooner. Anyone gotten their vaccine yet?
My wife has.
Eric has?
Yeah, Eric has.
The city of Fishers has a site if you can fill out a form if you live in Fishers, and maybe other communities do. That you can get on a waiting list if you can put some conditions. I'm 65 plus, so look online and see if you can get on a waiting list to get vaccines.
Well, Belinda's been volunteering her
I
time
can.
to give them. And I keep saying, like, what if, on your way out, one just fell in your pocket or something, but
Yeah.
fell off the truck.
Well, here's the deal. If you buy, instead of one of the bottles for next month, you buy the 6-pack, maybe you can trade a 6-pack of beer for the vaccine.
What are the beers next month?
So I've not quite established the style or subject yet, but I need to do that immediately. But
I was just curious.
yeah,
February porter or stout?
Well, what was that, Charlie?
I said porter or stout, February.
Oh, well, why not? Okay, I'll look into that.
I mean, what's the styles? Do we have a calendar?
No, well, I haven't established a calendar yet, but I need to. Anna's pushing me, and I need to.
As she should.
As exactly, she is the chief cat herder.
I know you're good for it, Martin, so, you'll get it.
But I'm okay. So porter stout sound good?
Yeah, I have tons of Russian Imperial Stout, so I think that's a great style.
Well, I don't think that we're going to go there, but porter stout maybe.
That's a category we
Whole
covered.
month, man. Big beers might be a good one.
Yeah, I think, didn't we just do porter stouts?
We did porter stouts pretty late last year,
I think
right
so.
before the pandemic. So I know we did.
We can always do them again.
We can. I know we did brown ales, and I know we did stouts. I don't know
Porter stouts, porter stouts, porter stouts.
Every other month.
So here's something else, though. There's all this conversation about seltzer. So should we be putting somewhere on the agenda a conversation about seltzers?
Well,
Or are those just glorified ideas?
well, I have to admit,
Carl,
I
throw
have-
out.
I've never had one.
Well, we already
have.
did Miller Lite. That's
Seltzer and
seltzer
alcohol.
right there.
I think we should have the light hydrometer competition.
Oh my
Miller
where it's
Lite
all
is the original
seltzers.
seltzer.
Well, wait, is a seltzer simply a Miller Lite with fruit?
Or whatever, yeah.
Or no barley.
Anything you can make with a store-bought product and a little vodka, we should not be talking about.
Kind of. That's what it is.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about
But
Moscow
it's,
mules either.
but like wine coolers, it's not it's not distilled or anything, right? It's for the tax reasons. It's that's why breweries make them. They can
Oh,
make
yeah,
them
it's
cheaper from a tax
fermented.
perspective than a distiller.
It's fermented
Yeah,
sugar.
seltzers are beer. If you look on any one of them, they say beer. They're brewed with malt extract.
They're,
Malt extract, a little bit of
they're
sugar.
They're sugar, basically.
I think you got to have a drop of malt extract in them for tax reasons, probably.
What's in yours at Grand Junction, Charlie? You guys make a good one as far as seltzers go.
We're doing it with malt extract and fruit extracts.
Is there is there a distilled alcohol in there?
No, we can't use distilled alcohol in any way.
No, I was just joking. I was like, if you bought a fruited carbonated water and threw a little shot of vodka in it, voila, you have a fruited seltzer. Same with
Nothing about
same
this.
with like the fruit.
But it's, I mean, it's for the same reason as like wine coolers are usually all malt-based beverages. You know, it's taxes. Bartles and James is a malt-based beverage. If you look at the ingredients, if they still have those.
I want a disclaimer. At Grand Junction, we do not call it beer. It is absolutely seltzer. We do not claim it to be beer in any way, shape, or form.
It is a pretty good one. I've had Grand Junctions, and Mullins makes one at Broad Ripple Brew Pub, and to my surprise, they're delicious little refreshing beverages.
Really?
Certainly not beer.
Yeah.
And for a boat and stuff.
I mean, but if it's only if you're like having to choose between water.
Can you claim any health benefits like they used to, that this is healthy stuff? So maybe sell it that way as a health food?
Hey,
Maybe.
hey guys,
I usually choose for a water and a beer.
the capitalist
You could
in
go for a
me, you
seltzer.
know what? The capitalist in me, that stuff sells, and it's got a great margin.
That's
Yeah,
what the
yeah.
breweries love about it. They make a ton of money off of fermented sugar.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, if we're gonna do that though, let's have a competition or a session on hopped waters as well, just so we can maybe we can start blending the hopped waters that I've been seeing, like carbonated hopped waters that they're selling now with the seltzers, and you could like create a beer, maybe.
Whatever.
Party dial.
I'm
Nope.
really busy that night.
You could
Party dial.
spike a juice box.
yeah.
Well, hey, I'm gonna go.
Yay.
It was
Thanks,
great.
Ron.
You guys enjoyed it.
Ron?
Send me some
I did.
feedback. Send me some feedback on that if you want. If there was anything you felt like I missed or should cover more, because I'll probably turn this into one of my worldwide broadcast dealies. I thought it was pretty cool. Pretty
Ron,
interesting.
but one item I see over here in the chat, what's going on with der Hoosier Braumeister?
It's going on. Just been kind
is-
of waiting to see what's happening with the virus. I guess the first one's coming up in 2 months
And what styles?
or so. I don't know. It's on the website.
Oh, okay.
I'll send out an announcement.
Thank you, sir.
Dana, can you get on me and tell me to send out an announcement?
Yes, I will.
Thanks.
I'll remind
Someone
you.
remind me. I'm going to go eat right now, but I can send out an announcement real quick on it. It's basically the same rough schedule and styles as last year.
I looked and I didn't see any.
I don't think the until later this year, the Liederkrans and German American Club are still not going to be doing their functions. So I've just been kind of waiting to see what's happening with the virus to see if they are going to do anything, because we are supposed to be tied into those. That was sort of the whole concept.
Yep.
I think at this point it's safe enough to say that for the next 4 or 5 months, that's probably not going to happen at this point.
But can't
the
we
rollout
still?
of the rollout of the vaccine's just going too slow at this
Can we-
I
point.
think a lot of us have brewed to the styles already for you, Ron, so we're good.
Say it again, Dana.
I said we can still make plans, for.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right.
We can, and I can go ahead and set a date. I've been dragging my feet because I wanted to see if the organizations are actually going to try to do something so that my date works. Is coordinated with them.
Hey, and Martin, my chat question was really about maybe doing those styles that month, because I think many of us are
Oh.
brewing those styles anyways. We're brewing Munich Dunkel, Schwartz
Oh,
beer, alt beer, and Kolsch. That's why I said that.
Yeah, and I totally agree, because we are a homebrew club, so let's try and concentrate on improving our home brewing.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Hey guys,
Tie it into those. and I can't taste them virtually. So
But we can talk about them.
no, that's what I mean. I mean, if I couldn't, it'd be hard to do it if I hadn't done the competition yet.
Right, right.
In person, because I'd be drinking everybody's beer that I'm going to be judging. But in this case, we're virtual. So even if you say, hey, I have one that's going to be in the competition, well, I don't know what it tastes like. So
Yeah.
No, but it's funny. We used to bring our beer that we were going to enter in a competition to the meetings when we would come. So you were tasting the beers that were going to be entered in the competitions. You just didn't know.
but that assumes I would remember shit. It wasn't ideal, but honestly, I don't remember shit.
We could always mix them together in a pitcher and have you guess what it
Way
is.
too many beers to remember how to pick one out of a lineup.
Yeah.
CRS.
Hey, guys,
Yeah, exactly. CRS.
let's make the $15 drawing this evening, get that done.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Me.
Yeah, right.
Do that before everybody disappears.
See?
We got a lot of participants tonight.
Indeed we do.
Yeah.
We got Kent Brown.
Kent! Still on?
Ah,
You have to be present to win?
Yeah, you do. Where is
No, I don't think so.
no.
Well,
That's up to you
was
guys.
on.
That's up to you guys.
he? I'm just kidding. I love Kent.
Was on. So
He takes good care of me at GF, so I'm good.
there you go.
We had 21 with the photo bomber.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I wouldn't count her. Him.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a woman. Sure. Yeah.
Hey guys, so I haven't eaten, so I am gonna get off here.
Night, Ron.
I have lots of slides and materials put together for my classes that I do. So I'm always if it's something I have some knowledge on and something I already have, some presentation materials put together on, I'm always happy chatting about beer. So never hesitate to ask.
Ron, do you so you don't have Wednesday classes?
I do Zooms with them on Thursdays.
Perfect.
Yeah. So either Tuesdays or Thursdays right now. Right now I'm in this weird winter session, which is only 7 weeks long. We got to cram an entire into 7 weeks.
Wow.
Up.
Yeah. It's IU at all campuses, they did this weird schedule where very smart of them, they were thinking ahead and they shortened the fall semester and the spring semester so that the fall semester ended around Thanksgiving instead of December. So it's like 13 weeks instead of 16. And then they did the same with the spring, having it start later, thinking that the winter was going to be the hardest hit for the virus and we wouldn't be able to have classes in public or together. So very smart of them when they thought about this. And then when they had this big gap in between, suddenly they said, well, why don't we stick an online only class into the middle and it'll be like the summer sessions. So that's what I'm in the middle of right now. I'm in this brand new winter session that basically runs over the holidays and runs through December and January. It's pretty intense. It's shorter than the summer sessions. So it's a lot of stuff to cover, but that's what I'm in the middle of right now.
You do a great job with the material, Ron. It was very well.
Ron, I will coordinate with you
Todd.
at least try and benefit off of your inputs.
Yeah, I mean, when I can, like, I don't necessarily have a lot of stuff on porters and stouts in England, but when it comes to Belgium, Germany, Czech Republic, a lot of personal experience with those. But I do have a history, and I got a lot of slides put together because I basically cover everything in my classes. And I've had to convert everything into these visual materials because I've been teaching online. which was a huge job, but now I've got all these visual materials. Like the Bergens, are they still on there?
No,
They were. They've gone now.
They took, you know, they took my IPUI class. They didn't get all these visuals, because when I did it in person, I basically just talked and I had some handouts, and you know, I didn't have to rely on the visual element like I have to now in a Zoom session. So I've had to completely redo all my courses, and I've got all this material now in these beautiful PowerPoints. So
yeah.
anyway,
On.
let's use them when we can.
Thank you.
Will do.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all.
All right. Peace out, everyone.
Great
care.
meeting night. Enjoyed
Good
it.
night.
All right.